Hey, what is going on, everybody? Welcome into my week 5 edition of my top starts and sits. As you guys should know, I'm going to give you my top 2 starts and sits for the quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end position. I haven't done this in a few weeks, so I do want to say another reminder with my top starts and sits that you can also factor the starts and sits if you guys play daily lineups. I know I do that on FanDuel. That's helped me. I haven't won the FanDuel lineup, but I've won some money off FanDuel. But I just haven't got first place quite yet. And I also factored this into doing some parlays on Underdog where I bet on the overs and unders. I actually decided I wanted to show you guys because it did hit for me this week on both betting the overs and the unders. Last week, from my starts list, I bet the overs on Kyle Pitts, Nico Collins, Geno Smith's passing touchdowns, and Travis Kelce. All those hit for me. And then I just did 3 on my unders where I hit on betting the under for Jawan Johnson's receiving yards, David Montgomery's rushing yards, and Drake May's passing and rushing yards. So those hit for me. So again, I just wanted to put a reminder out there for people that you can also factor these into your daily lineups, and if you guys like betting the over and unders for players. So yeah, let's just go ahead and dive into today's video, starting with my top starts and sits at the quarterback position. My top start of the week, I am going to go with Justin Fields against the Cowboys. The Cowboys have allowed the most points per game against quarterbacks this season. In their first 4 games, 3 different quarterbacks threw for at least 295 passing yards against Dallas. The only quarterback that didn't reach that mark, and he didn't even cross 200 passing yards, was Jalen Hurts. But now Jalen Hurts is obviously a better quarterback than Justin Fields, but a similar skill set. So something to keep in mind because of Justin Fields' rushing ability. Jalen Hurts had 62 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns against the Cowboys in that Week 1 matchup. And then overall in the first 4 games, they've given up 12 quarterback touchdowns as well. My other start, now this is going to be a 12, 14 plus team league start. This is maybe if your quarterback is on a bye week and there's not a lot of great options for you to stream. I know in one league I have Jordan Love on a bye week. Wasn't a lot of great options out there. I'm actually going to be rolling the dice on Bryce Young. But this is also maybe a daily lineup play that you could play Bryce Young as a cheaper option. Or maybe I would assume maybe his over-under on touchdowns is probably going to be 1.5. I'd take that. I would definitely consider taking that this weekend. But yeah, I do like Bryce Young versus the Dolphins as a sneaky streaming option this week. The Dolphins have allowed the second most fantasy points per game against quarterbacks this season. In the first 4 games, all 4 quarterbacks threw for at least 210 passing yards against their defense, and they've also given up 11 quarterback touchdowns as well. Moving into my top sits, my top sit of the week, he's going to be playing in the Thursday night matchup, so you need to keep that in mind. It's going to be Matthew Stafford against the 49ers. The 49ers are actually tied for the 4th fewest points per game allowed against quarterbacks this year. When you look at the first 4 games of the season, only one quarterback finished over 200 passing yards against the 49ers. They've only given up 5 quarterback touchdowns in the first 4 games. And then you look at the recent history of Matthew Stafford against the 49ers. He has only thrown 3 touchdowns and also has 3 interceptions in the last 5 games he's faced San Francisco. And then moving into my other top sit, this might be a temper your expectation play because I do understand you might have to play Baker Mayfield. So I would just lower your expectations that Baker Mayfield may have a floor game against the Seattle Seahawks. Mike McDonald's defense has been very great, very good in the first 4 games. When you look at the stats as far as why I don't like him this week, Seattle's allowed the 6th fewest points per game against quarterbacks this season. Only one quarterback that has faced the Seahawks defense has finished over 220 passing yards, and they've also only given up 6 quarterback touchdowns in 4 games. Moving into my top starts and sits at the running back spot, my top start of the week has been the popular waiver ad of the week for the running back position, the rookie running back for the Texans, Woody Marks against the Ravens. And I'll even go ahead and say, with the news of Bucky Irving coming out today, the news of Trey Benson coming out today, if you're maybe forced your hand to maybe consider playing Nick Chubb in your lineup, I would consider doing that as well. I would consider Nick Chubb as a cheap option in daily lineups. But when you look at this matchup for Woody Marks, he's going against the Ravens defense, who have allowed the most points per game against running backs this season. In the first 4 games, 3 running backs have finished with at least 70 total yards against the Ravens, and they've given up 7 running back touchdowns in the first 4 games. And then my other start, I didn't like him last week, but I like a bounce back performance out of David Montgomery against the Bengals. The Bengals have allowed the second most fantasy points per game against running backs this year. In the first 4 games, this is why I do like him, because obviously he does split the touches with Gibbs, but they've also allowed 6 different running backs to finish over 70 total yards in the first 4 weeks, and they've also given up 6 running back touchdowns. So I do like the idea that Montgomery is going to get fed often in this matchup. I can also see the Lions going up 2+ scores at some point, where they're going to lean on the rushing attack in the second half of this game. My other sit, that the preseason popular rookie running back Bill Krosky-Merritt against the Chargers. Mainly, it's just because he's just not getting enough touches. He only has 1 game that he's touched the ball 10 times, and that was in the first game when Austin Eckler was in the lineup. So he just hasn't overtaken the backfield quite yet in Washington. So that's why I really don't like him this week. And then when you look at the matchup, the Chargers have allowed the second fewest points per game against running backs this season. Only 2 running backs have crossed 50 rushing yards against the Chargers defense. And when he's not getting enough touches, it is hard to see him crossing the 50 rushing yard mark this weekend. And they've only given up 1 running back touchdown as well. Now, my other sit, I'm going to go ahead and say that I can understand why you might have to play Jordan Mason against the Browns, but I don't love it this weekend. I'm personally now forced to play Jordan Mason in one of my leagues, because in that league, I have Bijan Robinson, who's on a bye. I have Bucky Irving, who's probably not going to be playing this week. And I also had Trey Benson, who I was planning on playing, who's now on IR. So if you do play Jordan Mason, you're probably going to be betting that he's going to be getting at least 15 to 20 touches against the Browns. I understand because of the injuries to the running back position, and now that we are hitting the bye weeks, that you might be forced your hand to play Jordan Mason. Just lower your expectations. It might be a floor outcome if you're forced to play him this weekend, because he does have a tough matchup going against a Cleveland defense who has allowed the 3rd fewest points per game against running backs this season. Only 1 running back has finished over 45 rushing yards against the Browns in the first 4 games, and they've also only given up 2 running back touchdowns in 4 games as well. Moving into my top starts and sits at the wide receiver spot. Love Justin Fields, so I know I'm going to love his top receiving option as well, and Garrett Wilson against the Cowboys. Cowboys have allowed the most points per game against wide receivers this season. 3 different wide receivers have finished over 100 receiving yards against Dallas in 4 games, and they've given up the most wide receiver touchdowns in the first 4 weeks of the year, with 9 wide receiver touchdowns. So I like the idea of Wilson flirting around the 100 receiving yard mark and finding the end zone once or twice in that matchup on Sunday. My other start, I like Chris Olave against the Giants. Now, you can also consider Rashid Shaheed, but I like the idea that maybe Chris Olave is just going to have the better performance between the pair of wide receivers for the Saints. But the reason why I do like Chris Olave against the Giants, they have allowed the 2nd most points per game against wide receivers. Now, why I don't really suggest Shaheed outside of maybe spending him as a cheap option on your daily lineups is only 3 wide receivers have finished over 75 receiving yards against the Giants. Usually those have been the top wide receivers, right, for the New York Giants. So that's why I'm betting on that. If there was going to be a wide receiver for the Saints to finish over 75 receiving yards, I'm going to bet on Olave because he has been getting peppered with those targets. They've only given up 4 wide receiver touchdowns, so it does feel like that Giants defense is due to give up some more touchdowns to wide receivers. So that is why I do like Olave this weekend. And then moving into my top sits, I am going to suggest sitting Jerry Jeudy against the Vikings. If you guys did not hear, it is now official that the Browns have benched Joe Flacco. It will be Dylan Gabriel, the rookie quarterback, that will be starting for the Browns. The reason why I don't like it, you got a rookie quarterback in his first game, and this game is going to be in London. So it's a complete unknown. I don't really think there's going to be an explosive passing attack underneath, with Gabriel being underneath the center. So the fact that I think is going to be a more of a short to intermediate throws from Gabriel, I just don't see a high ceiling performance coming from Jeudy in Gabriel's first start. And then he also just has a tough matchup going against a Vikings defense who have allowed the fewest points per game against wide receivers this season. Only one wide receiver has finished over 70 receiving yards against Minnesota in the first 4 weeks, and they've also only given up 2 wide receiver touchdowns as well in that time frame. My other sit, I don't really love Baker, so I'm not going to really like Chris Godwin against the Seahawks this weekend. I think I can understand why you would take the risk on Emeka Ibuka, so that's why I'm not suggesting that. Chris Godwin, he did get some targets in that last game, but if you guys have followed me, you do know that I don't really necessarily love playing guys all coming off of injured reserve or they're back from their injury. And the first couple of games, I feel like they have to get their feet underneath them before they really start producing. But when you look at the stats, the reason why I don't like Godwin is Seattle's allowed the second fewest points per game against wide receivers. They've only allowed one wide receiver to finish over 70 receiving yards in the first 4 games. So if there's going to be a wide receiver that finishes over 70 receiving yards for Tampa Bay this weekend, I'm going to bet that's going to be Ibuka over Godwin. And they've also only given up 2 wide receiver touchdowns in the first 4 games as well. Moving into my top starts and sits at the tight end spot, the guy that made his presence known in his return to the NFL, his first game for the Dolphins, I'm going to like him this week, especially when you consider Tyreek Hill's injury. That should create a bigger role for Darren Waller in his second game for Miami against the Panthers. When you look at this, the Carolina Panthers are tied for the 3rd most allowed points per game against tight ends. They have actually allowed 285 receiving yards to tight ends this season. That is the 2nd most in the NFL, and they've also given up 2 tight end touchdowns. I know that doesn't sound a lot, but I believe the highest mark as far as tight end touchdowns allowed is 4. So that is actually a pretty good number to consider if you want to sneak Waller and stream him in your lineups this week. Another kind of sneaky streaming option I do like is Dalton Schultz against the Ravens. Ravens defense is, I forgot to mention this with Woody Marks, their defense is completely banged up. They're going to be missing Marlon Humphrey. They already, Matabuke, the defensive tackle, is going to be out of this game. I believe Roquan Smith, their best linebacker, is going to be out of this game. I did see Kyle Hamilton was on today's injury report. So that defense is decimated, and especially if Hamilton's going to be out of this lineup, who would maybe be a guy that could be on coverage on Dalton Schultz, that could also help him have a high ceiling type of performance. Going against the Ravens defense, who have allowed the 9th most points per game against tight ends, but they've also given up 267 receiving yards to tight ends this year, which is the 4th most in the NFL. Only 1 tight end touchdown given up in the 4 games, but I would be betting on that Schultz would get anywhere between 4 to 6 catches, around 40 to 60 yards in this game, and ideally finding you the end zone as well. My other sit, then moving into my sits, I know this guy has been very solid with his pairing with Drake May, but I don't like Hunter Henry in the Sunday night matchup against the Bills. The Bills have allowed the 3rd fewest points per game against tight ends this year. They've only given up 67 receiving yards to tight ends in the first 4 games, which is the fewest in the NFL. And they only given up 1 tight end touchdown. So factoring how the Bills have defended tight ends this year is a big reason why I don't like him. But you also got to look at Henry's history against the Bills since he's joined the Patriots. Since he's joined the Patriots, he has played the Bills 6 times. He only has 1 game in those 6 games where he's finished over 40 receiving yards against Buffalo. And he only has 1 touchdown in those 6 career games as a Patriot against Buffalo. So factoring how good Buffalo has been against the tight end position this year, and also the factoring that Henry has not really produced against the Bills in his past, is why I would suggest going with a Dalton Schultz or a Darren Waller over him this weekend. And then lastly, my last sit of the week, I am going to suggest sitting Evan Ingram against the Eagles. Eagles have allowed the 2nd fewest points per game against tight ends this year. They've only given up 97 receiving yards to tight ends in the first 4 games, which is the 3rd fewest in the NFL. And the biggest reason why I don't like them is they have not allowed a tight end to score a touchdown against them. So I'm looking at a floor performance out of Ingram when they face on, I believe it's a Sunday afternoon game. So yeah, those are my top starts and sits for week 5 of this NFL season. As always, guys, if you did enjoy this video, hit that like button. Please make sure you hit subscribe on the YouTube channel. You can also follow me on all my social media platforms. I'm at Cody Talks NFL on X, Instagram, and TikTok. I wish you guys all the luck this weekend. I hope you continue to win as we continue to get inch closer to the fantasy playoffs. I'll talk to you guys next week. Peace out.